You have bipolar disorder yourself.
Unfortunately, all the fire alarms went off in Stanstead Airport, and that was when the police arrived and the ambulances, and that was when I was first told the word bipolar. Not that I can remember that conversation or any conversations for about 3 weeks after that.
Welcome to Coffee, Eggs and Inspiration. It's a weekly show that goes out over YouTube and as a podcast on all of the major channels. By day, I think you're a fashion model primarily. Yep. You're the founder at Viva Fever, love that name, and you funnel your earnings through into supporting mental health charities and to raise awareness more generally on mental health. You're also the co-founder of Covert Jewelry. Go on, give us a flash of the Covert Jewelry.
I've got four on today, and there's 3 more out there, 4 more coming out next month. It's very exciting.
And you're now working on a documentary.
The documentary I am working on is something I wrote last year, and it is called Up in the Clouds. And we are looking at bipolar disorder. The amount I've learned doing it is just priceless.
You have bipolar disorder yourself.
Yeah.
Tell us what that is. I have no experience with that. What is bipolar disorder?
Okay, so I think a nice place to start would be what I thought it was when I first heard the word. So about 4 months before I was diagnosed, I was in a GP office and I was saying, I've had depression for a year now. I'm really finding this tough. Please give me another medication to try. And the GP went, do you ever have good days? And I went, well, sometimes, yeah. And my mum was with me. And he said, do you ever say sweeping statements? Like, you're the best model in the world. And there was me thinking, oh God, I always tell people I'm going to be the biggest presenter in the world one day. Like, maybe, or one day I'm gonna have the best brand in the world. I say those statements all the time. Anyway, me and my mum was so defensive, and we actually left that day really angry. I was in tears, I was panicking, because the word bipolar to me was someone maybe crazy, mood swings, erratic, and just not someone I'd ever meet in my life. I didn't have any friends, family, never heard the word. So 4 months later, when I got the diagnosis, after having a manic episode, I started to learn what bipolar is, and it is a mood disorder. So you can go through periods of being ill, but it's actually, for someone, there's 4 types, but the first 2 are the most famous or common. Type 1, you can have hypomania and you can be psychotic. So someone with type 1 to get that diagnosis, you actually don't have to have a history of depression. You will, of course, have depressive episodes after the highs, but you're someone who sits a little bit higher than the average person in your mood, and you have to manage the fact that you can go hypermanic. That can be anything from a change in routine. For me, caffeine, sometimes I treat myself. I shouldn't say that. But, you start to learn new triggers, and that's a lot of your recovery. Obviously, when you're very ill, the psychosis means you have to be sectioned. You're kind of a threat to yourself because you think you're a lot stronger than you are. And the depression which follows that, because of the serotonin you lack after I was manic when I had my episode for 3 months. So if you think about sleeping 2 to 3 hours a night for 3 months and being so happy and so, hallucinating all of this, you do get the low, but it's as a result of a high. Type 2 bipolar, which I've learned a lot more about doing this project, is somebody who is prone to cycles of feeling low, and the length is authentic to the person who has it, and they can have hypomania in between. So that means, no depression at all, but slightly elated. They might spend a lot of money, they might do the sweeping statement things, but they could maybe manage themselves off medication if they wanted to. With type 1, when you're psychotic and you're hallucinating, you really need to be in care. So it's seen as a bit more extreme. But following this documentary, and I could talk about this for hours, I think people with type 2, Stephen Fry is an example. It is much harder because you're more prone to the lows than the highs.
My perception was, as the name kind of suggests, bipolar sort of implies an oscillation between the high and the low, and you're sort of never somewhere in between. But your type is mostly you're on average high and sometimes manic, more high.
Yeah.
I mean, tell us what that felt like. You had some really interesting experiences. I'm sure they didn't feel interesting to you at the time, but tell us a couple of stories.
Yeah, so I mean, there's a huge difference between hypomanic and manic. So if you're manic, you're ill. You are ill. You're not thinking straight. You're not rational. And the first time that happened to me was when I was diagnosed and I was 22. And you become very spiritual, and you become, for me, a minute starts to feel like an hour. You can see everything clearer. Food tastes better. It's that kind of euphoria. But obviously when it comes on for the first time, you really believe it. So I started thinking, God has chosen me. I was almost wanting to say to my friends, like, guys, I think you should start watching what I'm doing, because I think I'm going to be able to levitate tomorrow, or maybe walk on water, or, when you start feeling this like ridiculous, intense happiness. And as a 22-year-old who's experimented at the time, I tried, MD, these kind of recreational drugs, for that to come on naturally when you wake up, it was just the most bizarre thing ever. And I think, the first thing which happened to me, obviously start hallucinating, and I was on Citymap at the app, and I woke up one morning at 4 a.m. Obviously you start not sleeping because you're so excited to be alive. And it said that a number 1 bus was coming to get me and take me to Angel Station. Obviously you trust your iPhone. So when your vision starts to show you something on your iPhone which is religious, I just started thinking like, oh, I must be dreaming. So off I go. This is September 18. My morning was just bizarre. Anyone who was attractive on the street, I'd just go up to them and kiss them. I was supposed to be going on holiday that day, and God knows how I got to the airport. And I got there, and my mum rang me, and I said, I don't know what's going on, but I can't get on this flight. Everything is so beautiful. London's the most beautiful place in the world right now. Like, I think God's coming to find me. I was just completely gone. And I then decided, oh, airports are so fun. Like, who's not wanted to dive through the baggage drop off? And I had convinced myself by this point it must be a dream, because everything is so surreal. You literally will drink water and be like, wow, this is just so delicious, and everyone's so attractive, just heightened. And I actually dove through the baggage drop off because I just thought it looked really fun. And I set off the fire alarm, and unfortunately all the fire alarms went off in Stanstead Airport. And that was when the police arrived and the ambulances. And that was when I was first told the word bipolar. Not that I can remember that conversation or any conversations for about 3 weeks after that. I got much more ill, but it's something I now take an antipsychotic not to be able to experience. And I would say that most people with type 1 would not want to go that high again.
The description of it, and I suppose for you, looking back on it now, the behavior must seem bizarre, sort of, stepping back and looking back. Can you remember how it felt at the time when you were in that experience? Did it feel good? Did it feel confusing? Did it feel bad?
I think just because, this is something I also want to do the documentary for. Bipolar was never spoken at when I was at school, or none of my friends. I don't think I'd mentioned that word ever in my life, except maybe when I had a maths teacher when I was younger who used to get really angry and throw things at kids. I think we used to maybe call him bipolar, or the weather. So when it was happening, you can't help but be so happy. But it's just, it's that level I now can't reach, even if I, got my dream presenting job or anything like that. These are all normal emotions. This is so high. And, I think someone with type 1, you have to be careful because a lot of people deal with the lows more often. But actually doing this documentary, I spoke to 2 men for the first time with type 1 face to face. And when they described it, I couldn't help but kind of just think, oh God, because you start to doubt whether it happened when you've never spoken to someone else who's had it, and all you hear is a doctor's account of what was going on chemically. I started to think like, oh, maybe it wasn't that amazing, or maybe it wasn't that good. And actually we had one guy we spoke to who he gave me the best advice. He said, he got addicted to having the highs, and he was in and out of hospital all through his 20s, not taking his antipsychotic because he loved how great it made him feel and how much made sense. And your creativity rockets, you know, you see everything from such a perspective and in so much detail. And he said he's come to realize the stability makes you happier in the long run, because obviously the low which followed that shaped me. And being in hospital for 3 months and Ealing with people who are acutely ill with a variety of illnesses, I can't go through that again. I can't go through that process. And every high has a low. And yes, it was absolutely euphoric and at times really frightening when I started to realize that was my mum and we were in A&E after. And why am I not being allowed to leave this room? Where am I? I'm in hospital. You know, it was constant. It's like, what's happening? But then you run away with your thoughts again. And I thought I was directing an episode of Casualty in hospital. So I was going around clapping and telling everyone to change scenes. I thought it was maybe I was in Casualty, or maybe I was at an auction where we set, like, honestly, anything. Maybe I was in training to work at McDonald's. You know, my mind tried to really figure out what hospital was. And I think that took about a month until a drug called olanzapine kicked in and I started to calm down. Wow. But yeah, it's been amazing speaking to other people who've been through that, because I mean, I think about the day I was sectioned every single day of my life, because there is a part to it I try not to go into where you just see the world in a very different way and in a very spiritual way. And I've got to respect that was real at the time, and God knows how that will happen to me. But no, it leaves you lost in thought. It's from a psychology point of view, it's made me so interested in the topic because it is a natural occurrence. And you know, like we read in the Bible that some people experienced like shining lights, and you just start to think like, well, bipolar is 1% of the population. So like, how many celebrities in the past can I start to diagnose, that kind of thing, who've acted in these kind of interesting ways. But no, again, can of worms.
Amazing. Yeah, I mean, I suppose, you know, we live inside our brains, don't we? And whatever our brains sort of construct in terms of perception becomes reality. Tell me, Rosie, what are the signs that one should look for, either in yourself or from people close to you?
I think, do you know what? It's interesting because before this happened to me, I wouldn't have been so aware to psychosis symptoms, to say. A few months after, or about a year after I came out of hospital, there was a boy I knew who was posting religious references a lot on his Instagram, and it was very out of character. And I think, you know, now that we're all on social media, it might be easier to spot a friend with type 1 going into quite an episode, because you do feel you need to share what's happening to you, because it is, you know, you've never learned about it, you've never heard about it, you just know that it's God at the time. But I think the main thing is, you know, for me, I always, in my teenage years, about the age of 15, I think it started to become obvious that maybe I thought in this way. It's just very extreme reactions to things. Like, you know, when my boyfriend broke up with me at 16, I moved schools. When my visa got rejected, or my visa went into a process of 3 months in the UK, I decided to go and work in Istanbul. When a friend of mine was ill, I got depressed. You know, I was so upset by people's emotions. And if someone was happy, I'd be happy. If someone was down, I'd be down. And then actually, like, you know, what would be quite interesting and what we've just kind of opened a can of worms on in the documentary is I have an underactive thyroid as well. And I think the majority of people with bipolar have thyroid issues. And it is that thing where if you're genuinely very sensitive, you know, to your diet, if I eat well, I feel great. I can't eat badly. I'm so sensitive to that with my sleep. Maybe that's they'll hopefully have those conversations around soon. So if your friend at 18 gets an underactive thyroid, you know, diagnosis, and then you start to think, oh, they've had depression before, or they've got very excited, might be easier to piece together. But on a very basic level, I think if your friend does, you know, sweeping statements when you feel high, and you can be high in your teenagers before something traumatic quite often, so you could definitely spot it if you knew a lot about the topic. But spending a lot of money, sweeping statements, so I wanted to be Prime Minister when I was younger, and my sister wanted to be a lawyer. And, I wrote to Tony Blair when I was younger. Instead of just telling the teacher that this girl was being mean to me, I decided, I'm going to tell the Prime Minister. It's little extreme things like that. And then a combination of maybe spending a lot of money. Mood swings is, I hate to say that because I'd hate that to be what people first think of, but someone who can go from low to high quite quickly. And it's not to do with hormones or something. It's little things like that. But I think mainly if we were to talk about the conversation more, I think people would be able to diagnose themselves or go to a doctor and ask about it if they were having depression, but it wasn't so consistent with everyone else around them. And that's what I wish I had known about bipolar for, just because at this age, a lot of people do struggle with their mental health. Yeah. And knowing there's a third or fourth or fifth option outside anxiety and depression, I think a curious mind would have maybe looked into those possibilities, but I didn't know the word.
Yeah. Did Tony Blair write back, by the way?
I got a letter from his secretary. And I also wrote to George Bush. I sent George Bush the CD to Where Is the Love by the Black Eyed Peas and wrote, just listen. That was my impact on the American president at the time. I just loved a challenge. But no, Tony Blair did reply, and God knows, I won't even go into what I thought should happen, but I was just very upset that a girl was being mean to me at school, and I thought he should know.
Fair enough, and good on him or his office for responding. So let's say that you're somebody who, in some ways, and I think this is true, frankly, of all of us, in some way or another, we go through these periods, some more permanently, some more in a transient way. But if you're suffering from a mental health issue, whatever it may be, what advice would you give to the loved ones around you? Your partner, your spouse, your family. What advice would you give to them?
So what I found really helpful is, for me, when the pressure's taken off you when you're ill. So I think that the thing is, until I experienced mental health and depression, what I learned from that is much more than what I learned from the high, is that everything is relative. And I was very dismissive before I had mental health issues about anxiety and depression. But I have to be honest, when I was down and when I was anxious, leaving the house was the biggest task. And, my confidence, all of this, it was so difficult. And I was guilty before I had anxiety of, if a friend didn't want to come out for a drink or for dinner, I would really be like, oh, come on, I'll get you an Uber there. Or I would really not understand that they have said no and respect that. So I think the best thing now, I have a friend who suffered quite recently with anxiety and is now doing really well. I think it's just understanding that in their head, what they find terrifying is just as terrifying as me going up on stage in front of thousands of people. Even if it is them going to Tesco, it is relative, and what they're experiencing is true to them. So I think it's just, there's so much stuff online with advice you can read, but offering to go to their house and just watching TV in silence, that was what my best friends really, really got right. Was you find it, because you're so in your own head when you're ill, I think just having company is great. And when there's no pressure to talk, that was the best thing ever, because you don't, you can't think of what to say when you're really anxious or depressed. And when a friend offered to come and watch a film with me, that was just, it got me through the day. So I think it's just, trying to remember that what they're going through is real to them, even if, they say they can't go to Tesco today and you think that's ridiculous. Like, come on, put a jacket on. For them, that is a fear. That is a genuine fear. And just imagine that's your biggest fear, even if it's very different at the time.
That's great advice. Comfort in silence. It's such a joy talking to you. We spent longer actually talking before we went on air, so to speak.
Good talk.
and we have on this interview. I think you're incredibly courageous for speaking as you do on the topic with such boldness and confidence. The things that you're doing with your business, or businesses, I should say, are wonderful. Pulling in behind that. I can't wait to see the documentary. Rosie Viva,
I
you
can't
are
wait.
an inspiration. Thank you so much for joining.
Not at all. I'm really excited for you to see it, and it's definitely not going to be an ordinary documentary. It's also going to be really creatively quite, I've got the best DOP and director I could ever ask for, and we're getting a female animator involved. Where the music's going to be by my mum. It's my dream documentary. So no, I can't wait to share it.
A real family production. I'll put links below or cards up here. I can't remember which part of the screen to point to for your businesses and interests. And as soon as your documentary's out, I'll make sure the link's in the description. Thanks again for joining me, Rosie. Really appreciate it.
Not at all. Thank you so much for having me.